I'm Betty Swann, and welcome to our show, Wisdom in the Night, where you get help for the tough decisions in your life. Tonight, I have a great guest. He's an entrepreneur and CEO of 16 Handles. Welcome, Solomon Choi.
Thanks for having me.
This is great to have you here. I have been so excited about interviewing you. I have a feeling that this show is going to be so interesting for anybody watching that has a desire to do something different, to do something out of the ordinary, to step out, really get out on the water and do something different. So I want to know a little bit about your background before we get started. Kind of tell me where you're from, all of that.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, originally, and my parents immigrated when I was one to the U.S., and I grew up in Southern California for most of my life.
Yeah.
I went to school for business marketing, and I've always had a dream and a desire to A, run my own business, but then to B, create a brand that would go global. That's always been my dream since I was young.
Since how old?
Since I was a kid. I've always been fascinated with two things. One is branding, and two is consumer behavior. And
my gosh, even as a kid?
Even as a kid. And so when I thought about it, why is it that people love or have this affinity to certain brands? What I realized is that whether it's a guy on a horse or an alligator or whatever it may be, that evokes a positive emotional connection.
All right, check, like on your sneakers?
On my sneakers,
Nike?
on the shirt, whatever it is,
yeah.
right? And so just the human understanding of how does that work? Like, how is it that a symbol or something can make somebody feel different? And I've always been fascinated by that. And so
you do realize that's unusual, right? That a child would think that way.
Maybe, but I've been an unusual child.
So, now, what do you mean by that?
I think I knew since I was a child, not only that I wanted to do that, but I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur before I understood what the definition of an entrepreneur was. I knew I wanted to run my own business, to create something, and so it's no surprise that after growing up and having worked in the hospitality industry, and my father was a restaurateur, and he was part of a large franchise, and in working with him, I realized I really like doing this, but I want to be the creator of it, not the operator.
Well, Solomon, I'm a little bit of an entrepreneur because when I was 10 years old, I picked my neighbor's flowers and I sold them for 10 cents a bunch on the corner of my street. So I understand you can't help but be interested in things like that.
Yeah. So really in 2008 is when I made the decision to move out to New York City. And that was it was a big risk that I took.
Especially with the economy.
Sure. And
now, what do you think about that? Because I know entrepreneurs take educated risks. Mm-hmm. Would you say you do that as an entrepreneur?
Depends when you ask me and what I'm doing. But I think another commonality between entrepreneurs that I've seen is there's a fearlessness when they feel like they need to go all in. And so that's, I would say, the main difference that I've seen between myself, peers who are also entrepreneurs, and those that don't have that is, the risk versus reward. There's a higher threshold for taking a bigger risk to potentially get a bigger reward. And so in my case, I certainly took that bigger risk, and I moved to New York City, just as the recession was happening. But it was
a lot of people couldn't get a job.
A lot of people couldn't get a job, but that's why it was a gift and a curse. For one, there weren't a ton of small business owners looking to expand at that time, right? In New York City, real estate really being so expensive.
Well, it was kind of depressed right after that.
Depressed, but still very expensive, right? And just business in general. And so, because there was a lot of uncertainty. But I think the type of business I got into, and 16 Handles is a frozen yogurt dessert retail store. And so what I wanted to create was New York City's first self-serve, make it yourself, build your own, and pay by weight frozen dessert concept. And I think that worked at that time for a number of reasons. One being, I think when people were giving up a lot of, they were sacrificing maybe some of the luxuries because of the uncertainty in the economy. They certainly were able to, find joy in a few bucks in a dessert.
I have a niece that's involved in watching those kind of situations, and she worked for a company that she said, because people can't afford the big things, they reward themselves with little things, and it produces the same kind of feeling they're looking for.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So really looking at it then, and as I mentioned earlier about kind of this consumer behavior and this positive emotional connection, I think the novelty of one, being able to create your own, right? And then two, being that it was during the time when people were able to afford the small luxuries that gave them that happiness, that all worked out. And then as you also mentioned, it was very difficult for people to get jobs. So the level of employees that I was able to get in terms of from a skill set standpoint was very high. Right?
What a deal.
So it all worked out. And,
now, who would have thought that was going on?
I didn't think of all those things coming out here. So, I'm not going to take credit in that this was a big strategy that I executed against. It's just that, I was definitely called to New York and something compelled me. But I had no desire on a personal level to ever move to New York City. And when I had moved here, this was maybe my third trip in my life coming to New York City, was when I packed my bag, sold my car in LA, and moved out here. So it was certainly a big risk in that standpoint. And it wasn't because of, a personal desire of wanting to live in New York City, but it was more, I saw an opportunity. And New York City, I felt, was the best marketplace, because the one research I did do was to see that New York City gets more unique visitors from countries around the world than any other city in the US. And I wanted to build a global brand, so I thought,
here we go.
This is where I have to go.
Yeah, because they'll come to you,
right?
And then when you go to their country, they go, "Oh yeah, I did this in New York City," or
right.
"Oh, they have this in New York City." Right there is advertising,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Really good advertising.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how about financing? Did you have any trouble getting financing for
so
doing all this?
my investors were family. So my parents, my aunt, and my uncle. So they invested for me to be able to open up one store. And I think originally they thought I was going to do this in LA. Right, makes sense. You have favorable weather year-round. I've helped open up restaurants there, and so that's where my knowledge.
And your dad was in the business, kind of.
My dad was kind of in the business there, so that's what would have been safe and made the most sense. But again,
you're not a man who does the safe stuff.
No. I wanted to. I felt I have one shot at this. So if I want to do this, I want to take that big shot. And it's who is it? Frank Sinatra, right? Said that if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere.
It's true.
And so I wanted to do that.
Have you had competition? Have you had any competition here?
Absolutely. I mean, there was already competition before I'd come out here. There's a brand that's around the world called Pinkberry, and they had already been established here prior to me coming, and so that was my opposition, as well as some others. And when I opened up the business in July of 2008, it was really interesting because I had 9 direct competitors within a 4-block radius.
Oh wow!
In Manhattan, and this was in East Village where I opened. But fast forward now, only one of those 9 still exists, and we're going to be celebrating our 9th birthday in July.
Yeah, and talk about the East Village. Why did you pick the East Village? Had it already started being the latest hot place to be a part of in New York City, or was it just coming into that?
So that's an interesting story. So really with the East Village, it was because I knew nothing about New York City. So I was walking from downtown financial district up to Times Square on the east side and west side. I took 2 weeks in January to do my market research. And I was just walking around aimlessly and blindly. And the more research I thought I was doing, going to places like Penn Station and Grand Central where a lot of traffic is, the more confused I became, because I grew up, in Southern California where people drive everywhere. And here I am in a city where people aren't necessarily driving, and it's very easy to get around, but it's so small in terms of a geographic footprint that I felt like, hey, a city that swells up to almost 10 million people a day, I should be able to open anywhere. But that certainly wasn't the case. And a lot of brokers and even friends were telling me, if you open up on the wrong side of the avenue or the wrong side street, that can make or break your business. And I had no idea what I was doing in terms of looking for the space, until I put my marketing hat back on, and a broker actually asked me, who is it that you're looking for? And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, who's your customer? And then I thought, oh my goodness, here I am walking around for 2 weeks in New York City just getting confused because I see so many people. And then I said, I'm really looking for that 18 to 34-year-old female, because having worked...
Really?
Yeah. Having worked at America's first self-serve frozen yogurt shop in California as a family friends, that's who I thought was kind of that main customer demographic.
When you saw them coming in, that's who you saw, like young mothers, young women?
Yeah.
With their little
again,
yoga thing?
And not that they're the only customer, but that's who I saw very high frequency from.
Okay.
So, so when I said that, he said, well, you should open up by NYU, because that's where you'll get, a lot of the young females there, and they're always replenishing new students. And so I thought that's a great strategy. And why I chose
Right
East
there,
Village
yeah.
was because that's where the main freshman dorms are. But now in going there, what I quickly realized was that there was so much competition, so clearly I wasn't the only one that figured that out.
Oh.
But you know, I took that risk because I felt that it was a bigger gamble for the broker to put me in a neighborhood in New York City that I didn't know, and to try to, you know, start this from scratch. And I said, you know what, I feel confident about what I'm bringing here. I want to be next to everybody else, because technically if I can show, really by the customers choosing my business over the others, that this is the brand of choice, then it would be a fair claim to say that we're the #1 frozen dessert shop in all of New York City. So
yeah, and because they're gone.
Well,
There's
they are
only
now,
one left.
right?
I know, but
Yeah.
how long did that take?
That took, you know, that was as of 2 years ago. So that took, you know, about 7 years. Yeah.
For that to all work.
For that to all
Yeah,
happen, yeah. But I mean, but they started, you know, the guy across the street from me closed down 6 months after I opened. And so one by one over the years, I saw it happening. And then I began franchising in 2010.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so where all have you gone with your franchise?
So we're in the Northeast primarily. So we're in 6 states in the East Coast. We do have a store down in Florida. So that's our one kind of southern state, the outlier
That you
there.
need to check every winter and see how it's doing.
Well, in the winter, they do better than we do because of the weather.
Well, all the people, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You need a vacation so you can go check on your
Right.
store.
So we're in 6 states. You know, our current count, we have 36 locations right now. We have 6 additional locations opening up this year. And you know, the biggest change has been since 2 years ago, we have 3 stores in Saudi Arabia.
Now, how'd that happen?
So that happened because a wealthy retail group from Doha, Qatar was in New York City 3 summers ago looking for retail locations for one of their concepts.
I've been in Doha, so I know they need something like this.
And they were looking at real estate, but as they were looking, and this was in the summer, so was very fortunate in that they came during a time when we're very busy. So they were seeing the lines out the door and you know, and we probably had 7 or 8 stores in Manhattan at the time. And so they're like, what is this thing? And they reached out to me, had a meeting with them, and then the chairman of the company flew out, met with him for about 4 hours, and ultimately he said, we want this brand throughout the Middle East. So they bought the rights for the entire GCC.
Oh my goodness, my goodness. Now, you told me you had been on Fox and Friends, Bloomberg. Who all have you been on where they've asked you about this concept and what you're doing?
It's really interesting that I feel like the noteworthy or the newsworthy things have always been around something that when you look at it from the outside looks like, well, that doesn't make sense, right? Why would you leave LA to move to the Northeast in 2008? Why would you go
over there when
and that's the funny thing is I don't feel like I controlled any of that. Like I felt like those opportunities opened up and I just responded.
But you see them differently. That's
I do see them differently.
Sees something and says, oh yeah, that would be great for me. That's a perfect thing for me to do what I do.
Right.
And everybody else is going, don't go near there, right?
Right.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of like that in ministry because I do ministry around the world. And I kind of go to those kind of places that people are going, why would you go there? It's not safe, or it's got AIDS, or it's everything. And I've gone and it's been very successful, so I know. Now, I do know you're a very committed Christian. Tell me how you got this close personal walk with God, because I know your reputation as a Christian. You're very devout, right?
I am, and my faith is something that I would say that has always been there in the sense that, you know, my parents are very, you know, very devout Christians as well, and, you know, my mom still till today, you know, goes every day to early morning prayer at church, and it was really through, I believe, my parents, you know, consistent and fervent prayer that I was able to really dedicate my life to God. And I'll tell you what I mean by that is, while I can say that I grew up in the church since I can remember, I didn't really take my faith seriously until after I moved to New York City.
Okay, now what brought that about? That's what I think people would be interested in.
Yeah, and so, you know, for me, if you think about it, so in 2008 to, let's see, 4 years ago was 2013. 2013 was a real pivoting point for me in terms of my faith. And so how I got there.
And how old were you at that time?
And I was I was 23 years old.
Okay.
Sorry, 33 years old.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're 37 now.
I'm 37 now.
Okay, so when you were 33, you had a pivoting moment in your faith, all right?
Yeah.
And yet you had had faith since a child.
I had faith since I was a child, but I think it was more of it was more my parents' faith, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
It always is.
yeah.
Then
and,
you have to get your own.
Right. And so I think it was, living in New York City by myself for those years. And in the early years when I experienced success in business, again, I felt that I was living for myself, growing this brand for the notoriety of me, right? And it became very ego-driven at that point because I was like, okay, I'm going to build this global brand and it's going to be because of me, because I'm willing to take this risk and do these things. And I think it was really at that time that God humbled me. And I had this revelation in 2013 in January where I felt that something was missing. Something really was missing in my life. And
in the middle of all this success.
in the middle of all this success, right? And I was, going out and, doing whatever I wanted, but it felt very empty, and here I am, it's like, I'm on TV, but none of that really fulfilled what I was doing. So I was like, this can't be it, right? And I had this epiphany where I felt like, you know what? I want to make 2013 the year that I grow as a person, I mature as a person, and I committed myself to exercise and running. I had quit smoking after 13 years.
Wow,
also, like,
that's a big thing.
right before. And again, so I just had this conviction inside of me that I now know was the Holy Spirit working in me. But at the time, I didn't know what it was. I just felt that I want to start reading. I want to, enrich my mind, my body, and my soul. And so when it came to soul, I was like, I really haven't been going to church regularly. So I was like, not only do I want to attend church, I said, I really want to build a community. And so that tugging and that emptiness of find a Christian community to really, be immersed in was what drove me. And I was church hopping at the beginning of the year in 2013, looking for that home. And that's really what it felt like. I felt like it was a homecoming that was needed. And then I, was fortunate enough to, a friend of mine, she had recommended in Every Nation, which at the time was called Morning Star on the west side. And so I went there and I checked it out. And at the time, I remember vividly, they were meeting inside of the Skyline Hotel, right? And I walked in and I heard praise, and that's the first time that I felt something, Spirit telling me, you don't have to look anymore. This is home, and you can embed yourself here. Wow. And that feeling that I had and experienced was not just okay, great. Like it was something so real and deep that I felt like I had to react, which is why right after service, I found my way to the information desk, the Connect table, and I was like, how do I get plugged in? How do I join a group? Like, what do you guys offer? And I was asking for all these things because, again, I felt so driven to embed myself there. And I'd reached out to a Connect group leader, and the following week I plugged myself in, and really from that point on, I became very serious about my faith. And
okay, now, all right, let me just ask you about a Connect group, because I believe if you go to a regular church, it's going to help you. But until you get connected with a group of people that you can kind of be yourself with, talk with, pray with, discuss the Bible with in a small setting, I don't believe it ever really connects, or at least it never did for me. Would you agree with that?
I 100% agree with that. Insofar as now I actually lead a men's Connect group myself as well. And the reason for that is I saw my life transform really during the time that I was committed to this Connect group that I joined. And prior to that, for the years that I was in New York, you could probably say that I was, what they joke as a CEO Christian, a Christmas, Easter only Christian, or when I felt like it, or if I had time, I didn't have any other plans. But, it was really through the connection of doing spiritual life with this family. I mean, really, that was my church family, was really my Connect group, right? And so, we were able to get vulnerable and really understood what discipleship was and accountability. And these are words that are thrown out there that I've heard all throughout the years of going to church, but until I immersed myself in that platform, I really didn't know what it was. They were just words. They were just terms and thoughts. Like, okay, accountability.
All of it was just words until you got it for yourself.
Correct.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and when I was a part of it, and it was a part of my life, and that was being lived out, and things would manifest through those relationships. That's when I realized this isn't just faith to a religion or a belief. This is what we were intended for. This is
So how do you maintain it today personally? Do you read the Bible?
I do, every morning.
Every morning?
Yeah, read.
How do you know what to read?
So, I mean, fortunately with today's technology, you know, I use the Bible app.
Yeah.
And, you know, I follow different quiet time programs, but, you know, right now my goal for this year was to actually get through the New Testament. So I'm on Acts right now, and I just read a chapter a day. And, you know,
Pretty amazing, isn't it?
it is. And to be able to go through it, and I've never done that. I've never read the Bible, you know, cover to cover, and I never had any desire to until recently, which is why this year I made a commitment that I would go through the New Testament, and then next year we'll be going the Old Testament.
You know, I heard one time, Solomon, if you want to do the works of Jesus, if you read about what he did and you think, Jesus, you still do that today through people, just like you said you would do. A man challenged me and he said, read the Gospels 4 times, all of them 4 times, all the way through, and notice how Jesus really did things. Put yourself in that scene and think about, how did he say it, how did he do it, what happened, where was it, what was the response. It was really life-changing for me because the Bible became so real. So now that you're starting the book of Acts, you can do the very same thing. I'd really encourage you to do it. That if Paul is doing something, you become that Paul.
Right.
If Silas is doing something, you be Silas. If Peter's doing something, you be Peter. If Timothy is, you be Timothy. You'll see the Bible, it'll become very real to you. Because you're it, and you're having to think, what would I say? What would I do? What did he say? What did he do?
Yeah.
It'll really grow you.
So speaking of the Bible becoming very real, that happened for me 3 years ago. That's when it started. So I just checked my Facebook, and it showed me that yesterday was the 3-year anniversary of when I took a trip to Israel with the church, and the head pastor of my church, he baptized me in the Jordan River. So that's when I was baptized. It was actually 3 years ago yesterday.
Wow,
so,
congratulations. That's a special thing too, isn't it?
And during that trip is really when the Bible became alive. You know, when I was able to visit the sites and visit, you know, the areas where Jesus roamed and walked and had his ministry. And so, you know, that's, again, that whole turning point starting from 4 years ago with that revelation of something's got to change, to then a year later being able to take that trip to Israel, to then, you know, stepping up and being able to, you know, help lead a men's connect group, and then eventually leading my own. That's been the journey. And so when I look back on it, it doesn't feel like it's been 4 years. As a matter of fact, sometimes it feels like it's always just been like this, because this is the way that it was intended to be.
Right.
And
it's the way God has intended it.
Correct. And so, yeah, so that's been it's been an amazing journey in that regard.
Well, now, what kind of challenges have you encountered? Have you had any challenges that really tested your faith or tested your work situation, and you had to depend on God to tell you how to get through it?
Absolutely.
You have?
Yeah. I mean, I'm still going through that now.
Okay.
And, you know, as my business has, you know, progressed over the years, I feel like looking back, at the time that I committed my life really over to God, and was the time that I actually started experiencing a lot of turmoil in the business. And what I mean by that.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I think because, again, when I looked at the early success that I had, where God wasn't the driver in that, it's very easy to point and say, well, that's because of my works. And now that I'm relying on Him, you know, I think I'm really, it was a growth challenge, right? I'm being developed and molded to really be able to depend on Him.
Oh, okay, I see that. I see what you're saying.
Right.
And so there would be challenges in that, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I've never had more challenges than in the last 4 years of business, right? The first 4 or 5 years of business were very easy. It was very easy for me. And so, again, I've been able to, it's made me rely on Him, because I think if it were the other way around, then it would be a different narrative. But I think.
All right, now for people that are watching, you know, this show is called Wisdom in the Night. And there are people watching you right now. And I know somebody right now is saying, okay, so you rely on God. So how do you really do that? So kind of talk about that. How you got the challenges you're talking about, you got the knowledge, you've got to rely on God. But there's somebody watching this show right now going, so tell me how you did it.
Yeah.
What did you actually do?
Right. So what I actually did was I went seeking, knocking, and praying to God for not only my challenges, but also just direction, right? So some of the challenges that I've been facing were personnel issues, personnel challenges. trying to grow when we're growing too quickly and we don't have the infrastructure set up, needing to meet the right people to open up doors. These aren't things that I had any control over, right? Building the business, building the brand, that I was able to do, but the things that I really needed and the things that were really challenging were things that I had no control over. And so what I did was I went to prayer. I went to prayer not only by myself, but I went to prayer with community of believers.
With your Connect group?
With my Connect group.
You
My
just were
Connect group,
honest with them and saying,
absolutely.
I need prayer?
And that's where the power of the Connect group is not just a bunch of people that are praying together. That's not it.
Oh, really?
No, it's really the accountability and the vulnerability that is needed to establish trust and then build that relationship, and then the power of prayer, I think, becomes magnified because you're in communion with each other at that point. And so with me, I was not afraid to just make myself very vulnerable and share the things that I was struggling with. And so that deepened our relationship, right? Because they've seen me go through the challenges, and time again, they've seen God deliver me outside, in victory with those challenges. And why it's Him? Because there's no way that it could have been done with my strength or my knowledge or lack thereof.
Yes, and so really it encourages them, even though they stood with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would guess that when you stood with them for their things and you saw God do it, that strengthened you too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a Bible verse that says, iron sharpens iron.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and wounds from a friend are better than kisses from an enemy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great, but I'll bet you still have big dreams. I bet you've got dreams on top of this.
Absolutely, and that's why, I feel that, so let me first back up and say that, in facing the challenges and in going to God daily for this business, it was a commitment, I want to say, about a year ago, or a year and a half ago, that I had a revelation that I said, wait, I don't need to struggle by myself to make all the decisions because I don't need to be the chairman of the board. I don't need to be the CEO of the company, even though that's my title. Because I said, actually, there's someone else in the driver's seat.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I started claiming that God is the CEO of this business.
All right, well, let's stop right there. Now, folks, have you enjoyed listening to this as much as I have? This is fascinating. You're seeing somebody with a big dream since he was a child and really achieving it and then running into struggles and challenges. And it took his faith and other people with faith to get him through it. And it took making God the CEO of his life. Have you ever done that? Have you ever said, okay, God, you do it, you do it? Well, thank you so much for tuning in. It wasn't an accident you turned on the TV tonight, and I hope you receive some wisdom and that you have a great rest of the night, whether you're going to sleep or you're going to work. I'll see you next time. Bye. Hello, I'm Betty Swann, the woman who interviews people on the show. I want to tell you about something we're doing that you might want to be a part of, feeding people with pennies and small change you find. The exchange rate makes them valuable. I saved $3.22, told my friends on social media, and they shared it. $215,000 has come in, 100% goes for food. We've fed people in 21 countries. Come help us.